descent whose original home is here. I am Rosie Gordon Wallace, president of Diaspora Vibe Cultural Arts Incubator and curator of the traveling exhibition Intersectionality Diaspora Art from the Creole City, presently on view at the Gant Center in North Carolina. And also the art consultant of Art of Black. My thanks to the DVCAI board and to which is chaired by Andrea Orain, and to our amazing tech team. It is with great excitement that I invite you to join us tonight, and the conversation is being moderated by Rosa Naday Garmendia. Rosa is a contemporary artist whose work is steeped in social justice and equity. Rosa will introduce our photography artist panel. But before she does, I just want to remind you a little bit about why photography is so important. Photography was a prominent tool used by European colonizers in the late 19th and 20th century, which relayed, exhorted, and exaggerated stories of colonial grandeur and prowess. These stories were dependent on framing of Black and other non-white images as savages, primitive, pagan, and inferior human subjects, who if they had not been discovered and delivered by Europeans from their plight, would have nothing in the world to live for. This conversation leverages the power of photography, not to speak back to colonialism, but rather to speak to Black diasporans, brown Latinas, and many of us that are in Miami today. This conversation shows Cubans in their interior lives among each other, engaging with and for each other. These images are not performances for the other. They are invitations that remains valid as long as we, the viewer, understand that we're the guests. Negara Kundumu, curator, healer, scholar, writer from the Fry Art Museum, is the author of those words. So again, I say to you all, good evening. And good evening, Rosa, our moderator. Just a quick reminder that if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll take care of it. Rosa, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Rosie. I'm so happy to be here today among colleagues and friends. Let's get started. Just 1 minute. We're going to, there we go. Okay, I'm really excited about today's conversation, and because it's friends and colleagues, and what I want to do is just get right to it. So I want to begin with the introductions. And Vanessa, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in photography?
My father was a military photographer, Rosa. And when I was 3 years old, he took me to Riverside Park. We were living in New York, and had me look through the viewfinder of his old speed graphic camera. And ever since then, I've been involved in photography, my brother and I. So it was not accidental. It was very intentional on the part of my dad.
Wow. Thank you, Vanessa. Okay, great. We'll hear more from Vanessa in a little bit. I want to introduce Sarah. And Sarah, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you got interested in this particular media.
Interestingly, Vanessa, very similar to you, my father gave me a Pentax K1000 when I was about 10 years old, and it was his camera, and he handed it down to me, and I fell in love pretty much instantly with the tangible nature of taking images, of loading the film into a manual camera, and having that engagement with the world and being able to edit it at my leisure. and I have yet to put it down.
Great. Wow. Great. Okay. And last but not least, Roy Wallace. Roy, you want to share with us about your interest in photography and how that began?
Hi, everyone. My name is Roy Wallace, and unlike the first two participants before me, my first foray into photography was not in front of or behind the camera, so to speak. I was what we would modern day call a wingman for a friend of mine who was a student and a photographer at Miami-Dade Junior College, as it was called back in the day. And he was a photographer, a budding one at that, and he actually shot photos for the newspaper. I would actually accompany him to do the darkroom process. And so that's how I got my first start or first introduction to photography. Following up on what Sarah said, the first camera I ever owned was a Pentax K1000.
Okay, great. And I want to continue with you, Roy, because when you travel with Diaspora Vibe Culture Arts Incubator, what gear do you take with you? I'm curious about what's your favorite lens. So how do you get ready for those trips as you document the trips?
Over the years, I've actually changed gears a couple of times. And the photos that you're looking at were from 2015 in Havana, my first trip there. And I was actually shooting with a Canon. I think on that trip, in terms of gear, I primarily use 24-70 f2 because it's very rangy. You can go from wide to tele, and it's fast enough for you to actually adapt to this environment or the situation when you actually come up on them. So it served the purpose, and on that particular trip, because there were 23 other people in a group, really didn't have time to do a lot of changes. You didn't have time to be by yourself where you're making deliberate attempts at getting images. And so it on that particular trip, it served the purpose. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. And photography has evolved throughout history. And the educator in me wants to remind ourselves that it was the discovery of two critical principles, camera obscura image projection and the observation that substances are visibly altered when exposed to light. This was around the 1830s, and that's really the beginning of photography. So I want to go to Vanessa, showing an image of hers. And I want to ask Vanessa if she wants to share with us a bit about her approach to photography.
So thank you, Rosa. I happen to love this image. You won't be able to make another one like this. I mean, in real time, because the hotel has now been painted a different color, and it's not very photogenic. But I love this image. I love the serendipity of the moment where you've got, the orange background and the white. It's just so Cuba, right? It just pops. But I also think it is very representative of the Cuban people overall. This is a man who is working for a living and works very, very hard to take care of his family. And so my interest in photography generally is documentary, and I love opportunities to photograph the Cuban people when they are being their authentic selves. And so, as you know, Rosa, Cubans work really hard to make a living. And so this man is, to me, very representative of the Cuban people. Dignity, working, and the color. It's one of my favorite photographs.
Oh, great. Yeah, if you're in old Havana And you'll see a lot of these BC taxis, right? And they're
Yes.
very funny because sometimes they have some really heavy folks on them as they're pedaling. It's a very cheap way to get around the old section of Havana and even a little bit of the outskirts. Thank
Yeah.
you, Vanessa.
Yes.
Okay, so this image is of Sarah's, and Sarah, we're going to be looking at some images that you took on 2 different trips to Cuba, 2015 and then in 2007. Can you tell us a little bit about those trips? How did they come about? What was your aim, or what you wanted to do there?
Well, the first trip in 2015 was I felt very lucky to go. It was with Diaspora Vibe and Vanessa Greene. I remember helped plan the trip, and it was a group of Rosa and Roy were there as well, a group of 23 of us, and we were there as tourists traveling around for the Havana Biennial. And we were lucky enough to go to many different studio visits. This in Hamill's Alley, this image was from there, which was a studio visit with an artist who painted the mural in the background. And so just the opportunity to be able to visit different studios, to see how Cuban artists were working and to document it. And I chose to do it. One, I primarily used a really small point and shoot 35mm camera, and I photographed in black and white with the intentions still to paint in colors from memory, 1, and 2, I love the timelessness of black and white, because these images could be taken at any time. I'm dating them, so you know when I took them. But if you didn't know, it could be at any time. The fashion in this image definitely gives it away. However, I love being able to capture the essence that's beyond the colors, I guess. And it's something that's definitely strange in photographing in the Caribbean, which the colors are everything. But I love that if you know that, you can paint that in. It can be any color and any image or any of that. And one of the largest takeaways from visiting there the 2 different times was the amount of innovation in creativity. I'm still really inspired by that. And so the first image you showed of the man tinkering in his car, I found that everyone created their own way to keep things moving.
Yes.
And so
that's right.
It still inspires me. Like the creative process of being in Choco's studio, which none of the images are from that, and seeing the way he developed his own technique in creating, because that's the way Cubans work. It's still, they work so hard, but the craft, they spend so much more time, and their skills have such depth, which I find so different than Americans and other people. But it's something that still really holds to me. And artists and people have a different sense of pride because of the effort that they put into their work.
Hey, Sarah, I'm glad you talked a little bit about your thinking behind why the images are in black and white. And I had no idea that your plan with them is to color them in. So I can't wait to see how that's going to look. I want to, on your website, in this image, you have a short little poem I'm going to share, if it's okay. I kind of put you on the spot, but it's really beautiful. I'm going to read. It says, "What a magical place, the sea crashing against the wall, the rocks, the salty air walking along the city, passing old lovers, new lovers, catching the breeze, fresh air, anything could happen." The Malecón is really a special place, and people from all over the city go there on a regular basis, 24 hours a day, and then also people who are visiting. Great. Thank you, Sarah.
Well, so what was, I'll say quickly about the Malecón, when we first visited during the biennial, there were huge sculptures and installations installed from different artists, mostly Cuban, all the way down the Malecón. And so the second trip I went in 2017, which was a residency supported by Rosie and Diaspora Vibe Cultural Arts Incubator, so I could return and take more images. The Malecón did not have the art. And so it was a completely different experience, but I loved that I had both.
Great, thank you. Vanessa, you have traveled to Cuba many, many times, and we've been there together at the same time several times.
Fortunately, yes.
Yes, you've traveled from Santiago de Cuba to Havana.
Yes.
And these next two images I'm going to show are from Callejón de Jamel, which I've been there so many times. It's such a great place. It's in Centro Habana, and it's a community artist initiative. The artist is Salvador Gonzalez, and it was actually started in 2011. And what I wanted you to share with us is how your experience in Cuba affected how you approach your practice.
Well, it's interesting. I love Sarah's work because, generally, I'm a black and white photographer. When you look at the photography I generally do, it's in black and white. And, before I started traveling to Cuba, my clothing, my whole wardrobe was black and white. I was living in New York and I had, black coat, black shirt, black skirt, everything was like black shoes. And then I started traveling to Cuba and it just didn't seem, I had to make a change. And so it's interesting that even though when I'm in the US, I shoot black and white. I love that Sarah shoots black and white, but I just felt compelled and feel compelled to shoot in color when I'm in Cuba, because my senses just kind of explode, my taste buds, because the food is so wonderful and the views are so wonderful and it's so beautiful. And so Cuba is a special place, and I've decided to treat it in a special way. But it just affects people that way, and it certainly has affected my photography. I think that it's wonderful, seeing Sarah's work in black and white. I've photographed the Malecon many times, but I've never photographed it in black and white, Sarah. So I'm going to have to go into Photoshop and see what I can do, because, even in black and white, you capture the power and the specialness of Cuba and the people. And so I appreciate that very much.
Yes. Visiting El Callejón is like almost like stepping into a live shrine to Afro-Cuban religious practice. And I always encourage people who are visiting Cuba for the first time to visit this place. Like you said earlier, it's only on Sunday at noon that they open it up to the public. It's filled with colorful murals and that depict poems and deities from famous books. Like right here in the very top part, it says, "Todo pueblo que se niegue a sí mismo está en trance de suicidio." So it's a very famous quote by a famous writer, Fernando Ortiz, and it translates into any peoples who negate their history and themselves are bound for suicide or for death. And I think it's a very timely quote. Yes, Vanessa.
Well, I was going to say also, and Hamel's Alley is a very special place. During World War II, for example, Hamel's Alley was a place where nobody really wanted to go except GIs who were looking for prostitutes. And Salvador Gonzalez, an artist, went in and basically used the arts to change the whole culture of that community. And it is now Cuba's top destination for tourists. So I spend time there when I go, because it reminds me of the power of the arts to change the world.
Yeah. Thank you, Vanessa. Yes, definitely. Roy, I wanted to ask you, because I was kind of curious, are there any professional photographers that influence you, or whose work?
That's yes and no. Not influenced to the point where I try to pattern my style off their style. I'm more influenced by what they photograph within a particular space. For example, there's a photographer out of Ireland, that's Trevor Cole, who's traveled throughout Africa, Asia, Brazil, and he does a lot of portraiture and landscapes, primarily with the intention of showing humanity in a space and the need to preserve that space. Also, like, for example, another photographer with his Eli Reed, who's a Black American. He's now been a member of the Magnum photographic group. He does a lot of black and white, and he's been documenting Black lives in America for quite some time. In terms of the context of the work, yes, but not total or overall. For example, when I was in Cuba, 2015, I find myself actually in a mode of documenting, and the documentation was primarily of the group I was with and the places that we visited, which were a lot of the installation from the Biennale. While we were there, I kept noticing this recurring theme where I would see a lot of people just standing in doorways. The thought came to my mind that, that's, very interesting. And the reason that was so, it's because in the Caribbean, nobody stays in all the time. They're always on the street. So it's not uncommon to see people all over the place, which is why when you're in the Caribbean, it's such a great source of street photography. And I just started photographing people in doorways. So as you look at the series of work I have, they're all entitled, but the recurring theme was they were always in a space that's a doorway, whether it's a transition space, it's a safe space. It did show something that's very common in the region.
Great. Thank you, Roy. Yeah. Sarah, among your works, which is your favorite and why?
That's very funny. Well, I've been revisiting all of these because I recently put a series of prints online, and I also have a series of people in doorways. But what I really wanted to capture, and I think I did, were these kind of mundane moments that capture daily life. And I love that I have those because I can kind of close my eyes and go there and hear the sounds of the bicycle taxi going down and all of the kind of the street rubbling and the smell of the Caribbean and maybe some chicken over there and some music. And so I'm not sure. I really love this. I think my favorite is the one of the ladies. That just is the one that I'm constantly going back to. There's so many different images of femininity, but that is a larger theme in my works in totality, kind of is looking at women and how they're interacting with the world.
Great. I wanted to come back to a question for you and also Vanessa later about the equipment that you use. You have a favorite lens. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Cameras, when I'm traveling, I really like kind of either the same Pentax K1000 that I started taking images with, or I shoot a lot with a Contax T3. So that's a small point and shoot camera. And so it can capture really quick moments when I see them, and it's very discreet. So I'm not kind of drawing attention to myself or anybody else, and I can kind of steal the moments.
Great. Thank you. Vanessa, I saw on your website that this series of Cuba Today has 36 images. I was curious about this one. What did you find in this image? Why did you take this photograph?
So that photograph was taken during my very first trip to Cuba, when Rosie Gordon Wallace and I were on that same trip, and from where my vantage point, I can't see the back, but it's yes, I can. I mean, that's how it translates, and I just really appreciated the seeing the connection between Cuba and the U.S. President Obama was president at the time. And so, and I just love the intensity of the conversation that that these two people were having, and so that's, you know, that's why that photograph attracted me. The opportunity to take that photograph attracted me. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I think that unless any of you want to address something in particular, we can take some questions from participants. Unless someone wants to add something else that we didn't cover, I don't know, Vanessa or Roy.
Rosa, we do have a few questions in chat. Would you like me to read them out for us?
Please, because I can't see them.
Okay, no worries. So let me go ahead. I'm gonna add our spotlights to all our speakers first. Sorry.
Vanessa, I would love to know what camera you were using while we're waiting for this question.
Oh, what camera was I using?
Yes.
So I use a Canon, and I use a relatively inexpensive and very durable Canon T3i. It's a camera that and my favorite lens is I bring two, a telephoto lens, but I also love the 50mm lens. And I purchased that camera because it's not extremely expensive. And, you know, sometimes in traveling, you bump and might even lose a camera or something. So I love it. And then, but if I ever lost it, it could be replaced without too much trouble.
Jump
Yeah.
in, honey. Jump in.
Perfect. So let me go ahead and get to our questions. I have from Michael Elliott. Question for all the photographers. How did you find the openness of the Cuban public to be photographed? Did you have any challenges with some of the people? Who would like to take that one first?
I found a lot of curiosity and excitement and, oh, bring my image back to the States and make me famous. Like, especially on my second trip, because in 2017, Cuba was much easier to travel into at the time. At least I found it easier. I was going to document and I got a visa at the airport and I went to Cuba. And so I would walk around. A very good friend of mine, also a photographer, we went together and we each had 3 manual cameras on our body, and we'd spend the whole day just walking around whichever city we were in. And people were very excited to have, typically very excited to have their photo taken, very disappointed they couldn't see them because I was shooting film.
That's good.
I find out when I was there in 2015, because it was at the time when the Biennale was there, people are a lot more open to you just taking photos of them. Maybe it's also because there were a lot of foreigners in town, and it was quite likely that they would be asked more than once or quite often to have their photos taken. So for me, it was a really good time, especially just to snap a photo of someone, look at them and smile, and not get a negative feedback like you do in some other places. So,
You know, I generally will ask, may I take your photo? I've had very few people say no. I'm very self-conscious of invading people's privacy. I mean, so I do street photography like street photographers do, but I love it when people are able to look directly into the lens and feel comfortable. And so I generally will seek permission before taking a photograph. And most of the time people will say yes.
Great. Bruno Matura from Guadalupe has a question. Considering photography as a reality in illusion, is it still possible to approach the idea of truth, a frozen moment, a latitude of perception in a society of profusion and interpretation of images, a relative truth from the artist's point of view? Who wants to?
Well, so I think truth will vary from day to day. I mean, we can look at the pictures that I took back in 2016. and we can surmise one truth, but if we look at those same pictures now, we might surmise another truth. So I think photography is photography is art and always subject to interpretation. I will say that because of that, I'm very careful about the images I take. There are images that I've taken that I don't show to people because I like to show people in their best, looking their best, at their best. And so I have taken pictures of people who were homeless, people who were sleeping on the street, but I've never showed them to anyone. I'm not saying that I won't in the proper context, but it's a political decision I've made in terms of how I want to present people to the world. So,
Thank you. There's an additional question for you, Vanessa. What language was the third phrase, yes, we can, in that photograph? There were 3 languages. Do you recall?
French, yes.
Okay.
Can I add to that Bruno's question?
Sure.
I think the way I approach it, I see a photograph as something that's time-stamped. And like a lot of things in life, somebody would say, well, nothing lasts forever. Yes, it may not last forever, but it'll last for some time with an impact and or memory. And you can look at it and it gets time-stamped to where you can say, well, was this at a particular period in time, year, whether it's year, months, days, or week. However, the intent is for it to have some impact. And depending on who sees it, the interpretation will be as they see it. Maybe not one that's the same intention that the photographer has. And I agree with Vanessa, you do take photographs and oftentimes, most of them, you never show them to anyone because it may be sensitive in nature. You don't want it to appear as if you're demeaning a circumstance for someone, and that way you keep it private. I'm sure at the time, most photographers are well-intended, and it's not to make things look as if it's not something that somebody can appreciate, but it'll also show, the intent is to bring the humanity out. And sometimes, unless you can actually tell someone this was my intention, they may see it otherwise. So
That's right.
It's a purpose of not showing the images.
Yes.
The other wonderful thing about photography is it's really, we all have the art form is we all have our own eye, and we all have or as a photographer, it's your choice of how you edit the world. And so traveling with Roy in 2015, we were often very near each other and our images were our own because it's Roy's take and it's my take. And that is something that's so special because you can walk down the street with the same person and see something entirely different.
We have a question also from Bruno related to that is how would you talk to a young photographer in these multiple distortions, in these multiple views? Or about these multiple views, I think.
So I don't, it's so I think that my point of view is that I need to be responsible. That when you have a camera in your hand, and when you are photographing people, there is responsibility that comes with that. So the responsibility in part is to decide, first of all, what you will or will not photograph, and then what you will or will not show. So I think that we live in a society where everybody's got an iPhone, and people are very kind of cavalier and unthinking many times when they snap a photograph. I think those of us who are photographers are much more intentional and much more considerate about what we photograph, who we photograph, and then who we show these photographs to. We understand photographing around the world, that in some societies, if I were to show the photographs I took, it could mean real trouble for some people who should have not been in that place where they were photographed. So one of the things I think that you accept when you call yourself a photographer is a responsibility that you have to think about the subject of your photography. And I think that is something that a young person should begin to read about and become sensitive to as they move towards maybe the professional ranks, or the professional amateur ranks.
Thank you. This question is for any of you. Do you guys have post-processing work that you do? And if so, what software do you use, if at all? Or if you don't, why don't you do that?
I think we all do to some extent. The whole idea nowadays I would think for most photographers is try to get it right in camera as much as you can. That way you do a little as possible as post. Yes, we all work in Lightrooms and the capture ones, and usually just to correct a few things that you think might not be right, or to crop into, because a lot of times when you do take an image, you're not necessarily going to use the entire frame. For example, let's say I'm walking around with one of my cameras that I currently use. It's a 28mm lens with a 47 megapixel sensor. So at any given time, unless I'm literally right up on top of the subject, it's going to be very wide. Okay, am I going to show the whole thing? First of all, I think someone would probably look at it if they have a very critical eye and going to go, well, I'm confused. Exactly what are you trying to highlight? So yes, you will do some post, and you're going to crop into the photograph to take out or leave in what you think is of, a great element or something that you think is worthwhile. So yes, we do. I do anyway. So
I hate it.
Expand on that, Vanessa.
So I love being a photographer. Okay. And I was taught photography by my dad, who was very old school, and I'm still very old school. Like Roy said, I mean, you capture it. You try to capture what you want to capture in the camera when you take the picture. I find myself these days spending a lot of time with Photoshop and Lightroom, and every time they change, they upgrade or whatever, I've got to learn. I don't want to be a photo processor. I have friends who are probably 10 or 20 years older than I, who never process their own film. And when you look at many of the old school photographers like Gordon Parks and those guys they didn't process their own film, so I'm hoping that I can get my life and my work to the point where I can maybe have someone else process my work, because I don't want to do it anymore.
I have to agree with you. Well, also, I mean, there's one thing. So traveling to Cuba with 50 rolls of unshot film and returning home with 30 plus rolls of shot film.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are photos from 2017 that no one has seen yet, that I haven't really seen yet, that I haven't really spent time with. And there are gems in there. I mean, there was a moment when we were taking a nap and we woke up because there was music outside of the door, and we just put our cameras on and it was Good Friday. We were in Santa Clara, and it was a religious parade going by. And it was one of the most insane experiences of my entire life. And we walked with them and we processed with them. And
yeah,
those images, you're not seeing them because they're not ready to be viewed. And that was 3 years ago. I would love to show them to, it's just so is definitely a rigorous thing to be about.
Great.
About the process.
Another question, Pete Simon. Photos of the civil rights movement in the 60s actually helped change the world. Do you think your photos, through the power of art, can change the world or only reveal your interpretation? And any of you who'd like to take a shot at that?
I'll go. I think if, as we said before, we all have maybe tons of photos that are sitting in storage device someplace, or they're in a box someplace, or a film negative that's, you know, the negative is done, but you haven't literally burned anything on paper. If it sits there, no. If we get a chance to put it out there and the content is seen by someone who probably says, hey, ask someone else, have you seen this? And word gets around and it gets out there, then it has the power to change. If it just sits there, no. And I would say in this day and age, most of it is going to sit there. You know, it's, if you don't have the platform to really put it out there, or you have a website, or whether your website is just there to highlight your work, or whether you're selling, no one gets to see it. That doesn't mean that they're not great images or transforming images. So it's not so easy to do it. And I think nowadays, because everyone and his cousin has a smartphone and everybody's just piling up images all over the place, there's a tendency to be overkill, or people just get oversaturated with what seems to be just ordinary images. And so the ones that are probably outstanding or should stand out either doesn't get out, stand out, or is outstanding because no one sees it.
Well, these images, I think, are quite important because it is a moment in time, and being able to show that we're traveling to Cuba in this moment when it's kind of open, kind of closed, on shore, and telling a story about Cuba that is not seen very often, at least in America. And I think that's very important. And I'm grateful to Rosie and Diaspora Vibe, because we can then show those works to people and tell that story in this moment like we're doing now, but also in a year and 2 years, and tell that story and show the works and talk about it. I think that is important. Will it change the world? I hope so. But but telling people stories is transformative. For absolutely, it does mean, Roy, though, we have to show the works to people.
Okay. If there aren't any additional questions.
I have a few more, Rosa. I
Okay,
think
go ahead.
you did touch on them. Sorry, they're a little higher in the chat from when you were, well, they did touch on a few of them, but I'm going to go ahead and pose them if we've got a few moments. Also from Bruno from Guadalupe, he asks, is fashion photography not always a sublimation of manipulation? And that goes back to our who edits their photos.
Fashion photography. So fashion photography, the point of fashion photography really is commerce. You know, so that's very different from the photography that we do. I love the street photography that I do in Cuba, and I mean that's kind of like a fashion show, you know. They're very distinctive, right, in their dress style, and it's like so. So the work that I do as a documentary photographer is very different from what you see in the fashion magazines. In fact, it's really interesting because as you travel around the world and you travel to places like Cuba, I mean, you will see those Cuba styles showing up, elements of those styles showing up in fashion magazines, you know, a year or two down the road. So we don't give that culture enough credit for influencing contemporary culture, but the Cubans really do. And the more the fashionistas, the commercial fashion people travel to Cuba, the more you're going to see the Cuba look, you know, in the pages of Vogue and, you know, Harper's Bazaar and Elle and so forth.
Absolutely. We have one from Carol Campbell. This is for Roy. Roy, I noticed an ambiguity in the doorway images. You're never sure if they're coming or going. Is that a deliberate consideration in the composition?
Not on my part. I just captured them as I saw them. But the intriguing part was, as I said before, this is something you commonly see in the Caribbean. And my takeaway from that was, is it a safe space? Was it a safe space? And if you look at all the images, there were some when they were literally in the doorway. There was one, if you look slightly beyond or a little bit beyond the doorway, there was what appears to be a young lady lying on a table. There was one literally which was through a window, and they were at the music conservatory in Havana. There were students at your desk. So again, there are a lot of things to take away from it in terms of storyline. Not all the same thing, they weren't entering and leaving, but the fact was that entryway was always the common theme in the.
So Roy, I find your pictures very interesting, and I'm really intrigued by your description, because I live in the South, and so we don't have the doorway per se, but we have the porch. Okay, so if you travel around in my neighborhood, you see people on the porch. It's kind of like, hanging out, in front of the house, kind of chatting. So,
And the stoop.
and the stoop,
Okay.
right, in Brooklyn or Harlem, yeah.
But that's also something, that's also something that you don't see when you live in the inner city. Nobody stands by the doorway. You could wait forever and no one will come through a doorway. But you see it in the islands. It's very commonplace, and I thought it was very poignant to being there at that time in the space. So.
Yeah, I wish I thought of that, Roy. That's really, I think those images are wonderful. Yeah.
Well, I love the layered voyeurism. Is the person standing in the doorway is watching the people go by, and you're watching the people. So I love that.
Yeah.
Everyone's looking at each other.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I think that this has been really a wonderful conversation, and I think I'm going to hand it over to Rosie now.
Thank you, Rosa.
Thank you so much. Hi, Rosa, Vanessa, Sarah, and Roy, who happens to be right beside me. So I have to be monitoring the feedback. We have a little bit more time, and I see a question here from Michael Elliott that I'm going to address. Where is it now? Michael has a question here that I saw in the chat, and there's one from Alex. Let me read the one from Alex. It says, is there a way that you prepare when you travel as a photographer in terms of gender and ethnicity? Is there a way? Anyone can answer that.
Well, I will tell you, sometimes when I first arrive in a community or place where that I don't know and where people don't know me, I will not take my camera out at all. I will kind of have people become comfortable with me as a person in the community where I am. And then maybe the next day or so, if I'm going to be around for a few days, then I will bring my camera out. Once there's some degree of trust built between me and the community. And I think that, the world is a very changed place. And, there's so many situations that maybe 20 years ago would not feel threatening, but do today. So I think that, and this is another, you were asking what we'd like to say to young people. I think that that's very important. You can get into a lot of trouble if you're pointing your camera, even if it's your cell phone, at someone or in a situation where you really shouldn't. So it's very important that you are aware of your surroundings when you have a camera in your possession and you want to take photographs.
Good answer. So in the interest of time, Michael Elliott from Jamaica. Jamaica is here, Guadeloupe is here. Our DVCAI global family, we are just so grateful that you're here. I mean, really, truly grateful. So Michael is saying, question for all the photographers. How did you find the openness of the Cuban public to be photographed? Did you have any challenges with some of the people? And I was on the trip, but I'm not a photographer. So come on, guys.
Well, I will tell you, when we went, when I first, Rosie, when you and I first went, 2011, I think, that was
is correct.
That was right after President Obama had been elected.
That's right. Right.
I think it was the same day we arrived in Havana. And I don't know how they knew we were American, but two boys saw us. Yeah. And they just ran up to us and they were shouting, Obama! Obama! I mean, the Cubans were just absolutely thrilled. Even the children were so thrilled with the election of this of President Obama. Yes. And that's something I will never forget.
I mean, we were like rock stars. I remember when we were going through immigration, the immigration officer said, welcome home. Because he saw, and he says, I love Bob Marley. Everybody loves Bob Marley. You know, he didn't say he loved me. He said, I love Bob Marley. And we really felt special. I mean, we stayed at the National Hotel, remember, Vanessa?
Yes. Yes.
And remember that bracelet that I had that the lady admired from the very first day, the lady who we changed our money with? Yes. Every morning that woman saw me, she said, I love that bracelet. Of course, you guys know what happened, right? My bracelet is in Cuba. So if you go to Cuba and somebody falls in love with something you have on, you have a decision to make.
That's right.
The last day I just took it off, one of my favorite bracelets, and I just left it with her. But the 2020, the world has changed. And we have not been back to Cuba, but I can't wait to go back to see the reception for us. We're two Black women, and we saw more people that looked like us than that looked like Rosa, right?
Absolutely.
When we went to Santa Clara, the folks became even darker.
Yes.
And then when we went to Santiago, we saw this that we show here, Sarah, Roy, you and I. Yes. So, folks, there's a reason why we did Cuba first in this photographic tipping back, tilting forward. We purposely did this, and my team, where's Kim Yantis and Sarah and I put this together because we're turning 25 years old. Diaspora Vibe Cultural Arts Incubator. We're grown up. And we wanted to look back and see some of the points that we have been able to accomplish. Sarah M.K. Moody went on a residency. When we turned 20, we gave 5 artists $5,000 each, and she was a recipient of that. These are not ordinary happenings for a tiny organization. We want to thank the Betsy Hotel, because when we did that 20th anniversary, Gide was there, Erman was another recipient, Rosa was a recipient, Sarah, and I'm missing a name. Who is the Sarah? And the Sear St. Val. And then now 5 years hence, Vanessa, we're at this crossroads again, where we want to give 5 artists $5,000 each in order to be able to do what Sarah has done. And as she said, it afforded her a kind of freedom that we didn't have before. So folks, we want to thank you. Let me look at my time. It's 7:56 and we're very respectful of your time. We know that you have lovers to go to. We know you have your champagne to drink, my French friends, my comment allez-vous friends. Comment allez-vous, Bruno? Comment allez-vous, Alex? I am Sava. So we know that you have all of those things to go to, but I'm telling you, our hearts are full that you have taken this time with us. And so let me go to the closeout. Sarah, Vanessa, and my dear husband, Roy, I thank you. This is Roy's, my nudging him to show his work. Folks, his work is beautiful. I'm biased. I am so biased
It's
because he's
wonderful.
usually
There will be a
behind the
book.
camera. Pardon? What?
I said there will be a book. It will happen.
There'll be a book.
Let's hope so.
Rosa,
Yeah.
thank you so much, my love, for trusting me and doing this. And I want to thank Amanda Kovish, who is a part of our team. Amanda is at MOCA. If you have not gone to MOCA, first of all, if you're not a member of MOCA, please become a member. And if you haven't gone to see the show, the exhibition that they have up, please go to see it. But you know, we have to do the closeout in terms of thanking our sponsors. Tipping Back, Tilting Forward is made possible with the support of the Miami-Dade County Department of Cultural Affairs, who have been with us for the 25 years that we have been on this journey. And the Cultural Affairs Council, the Miami-Dade County mayor, we have a new mayor, and Board of County Commissioners. DVCAI's work is generously supported by the State of Florida Division of Cultural Affairs, the Miami Foundation. Thank you to all who gave on Give Miami Day. We so appreciate it. The Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, the Ford Foundation, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS, National Performance Network, and the Greater Miami Conventions Bureau, Art of Black Miami, and my darling, the Betsy Hotel. The next Tipping Back, Tilting Forward Zoom will be held on December 10th at 7 o'clock. And we're going to be featuring two painters, Rita Clint, who is originally from Finland, but has been my dear artist friend from the Bakehouse, and Bruno Metura from Guadeloupe. And our translator will be Dr. Alex Pierre, and our moderator will be Dr. Jennifer Gargon. So we have a Guadeloupean, we have a Haitian, we have somebody from Finland. I don't know where else in the world you're going to get all of this mismatch. So the 10th of December, I always forget to thank Roy for really just kind of putting up with me to do this work. And then we have a young artist who is a professor at University of Miami, Isaiah Lindsay from Trinidad and Tobago, who I call at 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't abuse him, but he picks up the phone and says, "Hey, Rosie, what's up?" At 4 when I can't do something. "Hey, Rosie, what's up?" Isaiah, we love you and we appreciate you and we thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, and other gendered persons on this call, we do not take it for granted. It takes an entire village, an entire team to do this. And all of those sponsors that we just mentioned, we need your support to continue to do this work. Thank you so much to all who attended tonight. A champagne glass to you, and see you December 10th. Much love. Oh, before you go, Rosa, I forgot Rosa. I'm so sorry. Rosa is in a pop-up for Art Week Miami. It's called Rosa, help me.
Materialize.
Materialize. It's spelled funny though, right? It spells Materize. So I don't know how to say that. Materialize. Okay. Saturday, November 28th through December 6th. Please go and see Rosa. And Rosa is being sponsored through Ulight, the foundation that has supported her as well over this time. Ladies and gentlemen, and other gendered folks among us, good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Tata.
Guys.
Thank you,
Thank
my
you.
Jamaican
Bye.
posse. Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
A las paredes.
Good night. Good night.
Restauraré las puertas, las ventanas
So, thank you.
It's a really nice song.
y el viejo dominó sin doble 9.
Right, and that's it.
Voy a quitar las